When Trump imposed tariffs to save America, Canada stayed silent, until it didn't. In a single afternoon, 3,600 Canadian workers were left jobless when Trump slapped tariffs on the Canadian auto industry, forcing the massive Windsor car assembly plant to shut down for at least 2 weeks. Thousands woke up like any other day, only to find their jobs gone. This is the harsh reality when a White House decision, even indirectly, reshapes the lives of hardworking people across borders. Trump believed tariffs would protect the US economy, but the move backfired. Commodity prices soared, inflation surged, and jobs began vanishing. The US economy now teeters on the brink of recession, as a reckless trade policy inflicts damage not only at home but on neighboring allies. Canada, instead of complaining, acted. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded with a clear message: Canada will not stay idle. A 25% tariff was announced on all US cars not aligned with the USMCA agreement. But Canada was strategic. It didn't target car parts or Mexico's vehicles to avoid disrupting the entire production system. On March 4, 2025, Canada will also hit $30 billion worth of US goods with tariffs, including $12.6 billion in steel and aluminum. These aren't symbolic gestures, they're calculated countermeasures. Meanwhile, US consumers will feel the sting as everyday items grow more expensive. Canada's restraint in sparing car parts shows they understand the consequences of crippling a shared production ecosystem, unlike the US approach. Public sentiment in Canada is shifting. Citizens are boycotting US goods, canceling trips, and even booing the US national anthem at sports events. The tariffs have triggered unexpected, yet predictable, reactions. And Trump's response? He added tariffs on Canadian fertilizers and energy, items US farmers rely on. Canada's reply was simple: respect doesn't mean enduring abuse. These strikes aren't due to laziness, but to the ripple effects of US policies. The trade war's fallout is spreading fast. While the US spirals into economic chaos, Canada has found new friends. Once America's loyal energy supplier, Canada is now shifting oil exports to China and India, who are eager to pay more, without dragging politics into business. Within just 3 weeks, 11.4 million barrels of oil stopped flowing to the US, shaking the global energy market. Suddenly, the nice uncle, Canada, the one who always lent you oil, is saying, I've found someone new. With gas prices in California hitting $5.25 per gallon, US citizens are left wondering if they can even afford coffee. Refineries are down to 71% capacity, from 89% a month ago. And it's not just gas, steel, vegetables, and beef are all climbing in price. America's economy is grinding, and Canada is moving on. Thanks to the Trans Mountain expansion, Canada can now transport up to 890,000 barrels of oil daily, without US routes. They've signed long-term deals with China and India to export 325,000 barrels daily for 15 years, free from US demands or political strings. While the US fights pointless trade battles, Canada quietly grows stronger, watching its former partner stumble. Experts warn the US may enter a mild recession by Q2 2025. Goldman Sachs predicts a 0.8% GDP drop due to the Canadian oil cutoff. As steel and food prices surge, the average American struggles to afford even basic meals. Just one night after Trump declared Liberation Day from trade dependency, the US futures market crashed 1,000 points. It was no liberation, just the start of a global tariff war. Trump's tariff formula shocked the world. He took the trade deficit with each country, divided it by export volume, and turned it into a tariff rate, often inaccurate and inflated. Indonesia, for instance, was hit with a supposed 64% tariff, despite no such real-world policy. And who ends up paying for all of this? Not governments, but American families, businesses, and workers. Everyday products, food, electronics, cars, are becoming luxuries. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, expressed her disappointment, stating that Europe didn't start this fight but would defend itself. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese echoed the same. Around the world, former allies watch in dismay as the US digs itself deeper, all while claiming victory in a war that's costing its people the most. The Trump administration's decision to impose sweeping tariffs on nations around the world has triggered a firestorm of reactions, none more pointed than those from America's closest allies. Australia, while not entirely surprised, was blunt. Their leaders condemned the tariffs as totally unwarranted, warning they contradict the very foundation of US-Australia relations. This is not the act of a friend, they declared. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, echoed that sentiment, warning that the US economy itself would suffer from these policies, an impact that would, in turn, affect Canada. He vowed to fight back with countermeasures. And he wasn't alone. Critics from academia to politics piled on. Professor Scott Lucas called Trump's approach the dumbest and most economically illiterate he'd ever seen. The numbers support his concern. Modeling shows that US tariffs could peak at 29%, the highest since the Great Depression. The global economic cost? An estimated $1.4 trillion, with Americans shouldering up to $6 trillion in indirect tax burdens. Even conservatives couldn't defend it. Former Australian Prime Minister John Howard flatly rejected tariffs, saying they do not save jobs, they only raise prices. Republican Senator Rand Paul offered a historical warning. Tariffs have not only hurt the economy, they've destroyed political careers. Despite claims of American energy independence, the US remains deeply reliant on Canadian imports. Every day, over 4.4 million barrels of oil flow in from Canada, amounting to 60% of US oil imports. Why? Because American refineries are designed for Canadian heavy crude, not the lighter domestic variant. If Canadian supplies stop, the US may be forced to turn to the Middle East, driving up costs and risking greater instability. Natural gas is another cornerstone. Canada sends 8.5 billion cubic feet of gas daily to the US, especially critical for heating in the northern states. Without it, gas prices would skyrocket and millions could be left cold in winter. Even electricity flows south from Canada. Provinces like Quebec and Ontario export billions of kilowatt-hours annually to stabilize the US power grid. If those exports stop, power shortages and industrial slowdowns could follow. Yet Trump continues to escalate. Even as he calls for energy independence, he pushed for the Keystone XL pipeline, a direct line to Canadian oil. It reveals the truth: the US still needs Canada. In retaliation, Canada hit back with tariffs on $155 billion worth of US goods, targeting agriculture, automobiles, and steel. Should energy exports be restricted, the US economy could face catastrophic consequences. These tensions extend far beyond the US-Canada border. Tariffs on Mexico have raised similar concerns, particularly in the auto industry. US car manufacturers rely heavily on Canadian and Mexican parts, from engines and transmissions to raw aluminum and electronics from Asia. Disrupting this supply chain means production costs soar and American competitiveness suffers. Can the US really shift all production back home? Not likely. Labor costs are higher, regulations stricter, and raw material supplies insufficient. Rebuilding domestic manufacturing could take up to a decade and billions of dollars. In the meantime, American consumers would feel the sting, through rising prices and inflation. Canada, meanwhile, is playing hardball. Ontario Premier Doug Ford threatened to cut electricity exports to the US, a move that would severely impact the Northeast. He went further, canceling a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink, criticizing Musk for aligning with Trump's policies despite having studied in Canada. And there's a strategic wildcard: minerals. Ontario provides nearly half of the US's nickel, a vital material for cars and electronics. If Canada restricts its export, US industries could face massive disruption. This is more than a trade dispute. It's a full-blown conflict over resources, economic power, and political sovereignty. Now, the US stock market is shaking. The Dow plunged nearly 900 points, its steepest drop in over 2 years. Yet Trump refuses to confirm a recession, calling it temporary volatility. But with economic uncertainty mounting and global alliances fraying, many are beginning to ask, is the America First policy actually putting America last?